Yeah, dear fellow philosophers, welcome back to our little series where we really try to read Hegel, especially the philosophy of history, and try to understand what this concept of history is about. Reading Hegel is difficult, and I think we should read him together. I think it can add a lot to our understanding of the world, especially because he develops a notion of dialectics. Now, how do we have to understand that? Um, if we look at this quote of John Brenner, I don't know who's John Brenner, but he said, Papa Hegel, he said that all we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. And he says, that's probably true. I knew people who can't even learn from what happened this morning. Hegel must have been taking the long view. So this is a central claim that is attributed to Hegel, that we don't learn anything from history. And he takes over the position of a sage who stands on the sidelines and who's just chilling. So when friends, for example, freak out about current events, which happens quite often in my friend circle, Hegel holds the position that you should just chill on the sidelines of history and wait for the synthesis to occur. Now, this seems to be a very passive strategy, but I think he believes that an interpretation of current historical events is not easily achievable. And first, we have to understand how understanding history is a part of history itself. And this involves a longer process of grasping what history is that does not mean that we achieve an escape from the way history blurs our view. Maybe we can, but I'm not sure that that is possible. So in that regard, Hegel is interesting because he looks at history and the knowledge of history as a history of power struggles. And can we get beyond that? That's really the question. So therefore, after this short introduction, let's get back to our text. Hegel's lectures on the history of philosophy. And we have read that last time already together. I still hope that you're commenting on it a bit more. And we pointed first to a contradiction that occurs when we say history of philosophy. Isn't philosophy about the truth something that is eternal and unchangeable? Can it therefore have a history? And in order to answer this contradiction, or maybe to clarify that contradiction, Hegel said, well, we have to look at outward history and inward history. Outward history involves all the random contingent things that people do, while the inward history deals more with the development of subjects within a particular science. Now, we have discussed about that a bit. I hope we discuss it, but we want to go on and read now a little bit more the next sections to come. Maybe we start. Yeah, let's start with this sentence. The other sciences, including philosophy, have also an external history like religion. So external history means that there are people who do philosophy and who somehow belong to a history, but they don't really tell us the story of how truth develops. What would be such a story? Well, let's talk about my other lectures that I do on YouTube or discussion panels, especially the ones that I do on Kurzweil and the question whether the singularity is near, the event where machines become eventually as smart as humans, and at the same time, when this event happens, supersede humans in an unimaginable way. Now, how does Ray Kurzweil look at history? He doesn't tell the history of person X having discovered fire, or another person inventing the printing machine. He orders all of these events with regard to a teleological goal, an end goal of history, where he says every event is only relevant insofar as it had been contributing to the emergence of this singularity. Now, obviously, me rubbing my hands right now, that's not really contributing to history, though it is a part of a possibly recordable history, does not really contribute to this event of a singularity. Now, the question is whether Hegel has such a teleological goal in mind. I'm not so sure. It probably moves in directions, but does he say, well, it moves into this direction? If there's a direction, it moves towards the realization of human freedom. Well, now you may say, well, but we have capitalism and everything becomes worse. Maybe, but I think what he wants to express is that humans are not defined as a biological organism who they are. If you look at a plant is a plant is a plant is a plant is a plant, a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. You know that famous saying. Animals, they live from their center back into their center. As Helmut Plessner would say, they are not reflectively broken. Humans, however, they look at themselves and they don't know who they are. They distance themselves from themselves by looking at themselves. And this may be a form of freedom where humans cannot just be. They have to realize themselves. And that is what history moves towards to an opening of the human essence that is not confined necessarily to its biological restrictions. Now, does it mean that we move towards the singularity of Kurzweil? That's another question. But let's go on. So philosophy has an external history like religion, and philosophy has a history of its origin, diffusion, maturity, decay, revival. A history of its teachers, promoters, and of its opponents often too, of an outward relation to religion and occasionally to the state. This side of its history likewise gives occasion to interesting questions. Amongst other such, it is asked why philosophy, the doctrine of absolute truth, seems to have revealed itself on the whole to a small number of individuals, to special nations, and how it has limited itself to particular periods of time. Yeah, it's true. The outward history of philosophy brings forth the inner history of philosophy, but that does not happen in all nations, and that does not happen to all individuals. Many people, for example, are not interested in philosophy. Similarly, with respect to Christianity, to the truth in a much more universal form than the philosophical, a difficulty has been encountered in respect to the question whether there is a contradiction in fact that this religion should have appeared so late in time and that it should have remained so long and should still remain limited to special races of man. But these and other similar questions are too much a matter of detail to depend merely on the general conflict referred to. And when we have further touched upon the peculiar character of philosophic knowledge, we may go more specifically, more especially into the aspects which relate to the external existence and external history of philosophy. So yeah, for religion, that's a complicated theological question. Why did the truth, which is Jesus, just occur so late in the history of philosophy? Why was it necessary that first humans sin and then Jesus takes the sin back? I don't want to dive into that because I'm not a Catholic theologian. And I think Hegel also does not really want to dive into that question. I heard he was a strong Christian because of his wife, but obviously he's more interested in the question of philosophy here. But as regards the comparison between the history of religion and that of philosophy as to inner content, so here's the important question. right? The comparison of the history of religion and that of philosophy to inner content, there's not in the latter as there is in religion a fixed and fundamental truth. So here we have a very important sentence. But as regards the comparison between the history of religion and that of philosophy as to inner content, there's not in the latter as there's in religion. So in philosophy, we have no fixed and fundamental truth that is unchangeable and that is apart from history. That's what he says here. Now we still have to ask what that means. First interpretation means there is no truth for human beings that they can acquire without dealing with their history. And he compares it with religion. So the content of Christianity, which is truth, has however remained unaltered as such and has therefore little history, or as good as none. Hence in religion, on account of its very nature. And Jesus was born and then they had the Bible and nobody really added something to the Bible anymore. The Bible remained the absolute foundation of religion, and so there was for maybe 1,800 years no further addition to the history of Christianity, except like some external events of Christians killing a lot of Muslims and so on and so forth. Hence, in religion, on account of its very nature as Christianity, the conflict referred to disappears. So there's no conflict between dealing with the truth and having a history of the truth. The errors and additions constitute no difficulty. They are transitory and altogether historical in character. Now he talks about the other sciences. What is their relationship to truth? And he says, they are just like building upon each other. In that sense, they have a history, but their content is not really related to an inward movement of history. Let's look what he says. The other sciences indeed have also, according to their content and history, a part of which relates to alterations and the renunciation of tenets which were formerly current. But perhaps the greater part of the history relates to what has proved permanent, so that what was new was not an alteration on earlier acquisitions, but an addition to them. So, we have new things that we discover and they just add to the canon of knowledge that we already have. And he gives some examples. It is true that in botany, mineralogy, and so on, much is dependent on what was previously known, but by far the greatest part remains stationary, and by means of fresh matter is merely added to without itself being affected by the addition. So there is no notion of grave paradigm shifts. It's always just added on top of each other. And that's maybe also when we have anatomy, right? We just discover new bones and new muscles. We don't say, oh wait, what the hell? These muscles are not true. They're actually something else. No, we don't say that, right? There's no dialectical movement in that kind of ordering science. With a science like mathematics, history has in the main only the pleasing task of recording further additions. Thus, that's maybe not true for mathematics nowadays anymore, right? But back then it was the case. Nowadays they indeed discuss different takes on mathematics, and there's no unified mathematics in that sense anymore. Thus, to take an example, elementary geometry, insofar as it was created by Euclid, may from his time on be regarded as having no further history. But he also says it may be regarded, right? There may be another view possible in this too. So even these eternal truths that we have regarded back then, they were overcome, they were revealed as not being the truth. And I think Hegel would be open for such a discussion. Why is that? Because he already has this historical view on philosophy. The history of philosophy, on the other hand, shows neither the motionless of a complete simple content, nor altogether the onward movement of a peaceful addition of new treasures to those already acquired. So there is no simple content in philosophy where we say, God is dead, or God is great, God is one. Even though philosophy likes to reflect on the whole in a metaphysical manner, to ask, okay, what is the whole? The whole is one. It wouldn't really say that, because the whole has a contradiction in itself already. Because see, does the whole contain the definition of itself? Can it be defined? Something can only be defined if you separate it from something else. That's an argument from Spinoza that I'm using here, but Hegel also uses that in the logic. Now, if there cannot be anything outside of the whole, how can the whole be defined, right? And can we then really say the whole is one? Is it one by virtue of itself? Is there another whole that it defines with relation to itself? Is it the same whole as itself? I'm sorry, I make it very complicated, but I want to say this is really what Hegel deals with. There is no simple content in philosophy where we say, well, but that is the truth, right? Come on. People tried that in philosophy again and again, but Hegel says, no, we don't have that. And it's also not a peaceful way of moving on. We don't peacefully agree with each other and hold hands and play a nice children's games in the backyard. No. We actually fight with each other about what is the truth. Now that doesn't have to end in civil wars or something. But it's a debate and a discussion, at least, where we don't necessarily come to agreement. And so he finally says, it seems merely to afford the spectacle of ever recurring changes in the whole, such as finally are no longer even connected by the common aim. So, of course, he says here, it seems. So he doesn't want to say that all of it is fight and battle and struggle, right? But it's also not that it's just a peaceful addition of content, like in mathematics at his time, where somebody said, I figured something out, and somebody said, let's see. And then they said, if A plus B is A plus B, then B plus A is A plus B. No. I'm sorry, I give like some stupid examples. I don't know to say it. I didn't prepare better examples, but I hope you get what I mean. So yeah, and having these preliminary definitions, we can maybe now look into what philosophy or the history of philosophy is. But starting for that, he starts in an Aristotelian dialectical way. He looks at common ideas of philosophy, which takes a larger portion. But then we come to the B part, where we have a proof of the futility of philosophical knowledge obtained through the history of philosophy itself. So even if our knowledge of philosophy is historical, how can we claim it to be philosophical knowledge? And so we dive more and more into the definition of the history of philosophy, which I hope you join me for in the next lectures. Now, I think to me, this is a very interesting discussion. I hope you see that in a similar way. I tried to find the notes that I had at the beginning, but now they're gone. Where are all my nice pictures? Oh, I closed the window. Okay. So we have to end with a black screen. So yeah, what do you think about Hegel, the history of philosophy? Do you think there are eternal truths? Or do you think there's only one truth, that there are no eternal truths? Yeah, let me know in the comments. And if you want to follow further readings together where we really dive into philosophy and don't really just deal with it in a superficial manner, then please subscribe and follow my philosophy channel. If you're interested in Ray Kurzweil and more technological subjects, then follow my other channel where I discuss Ray Kurzweil. Give me a like, just support a bit. Check out my other presences on social media. And if you have done all of that, then I just say carpe diem, use the day, enjoy the day. That's what I should say. So bye bye.